Adrian was sitting at a small table in a pub. In front of him stood his third pint of beer, which he sipped slowly, pretending to be deeply interested in what was happening on the television screen. He had recently discovered this pub, just a few steps away from his house. The place branded itself as a haven for sports enthusiasts, but in reality, the patrons seemed more focused on enjoying the excellent beer than cheering for their favorite teams. Adrian, however, wasn't paying attention to the screens. His thoughts were consumed by his family life, which was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. Truthfully, he didn't want to anymore. He could forgive Elena anything but betrayal. It all started when Elena, his wife of many years, suddenly decided to go to a health resort. By some twist of fate, Julia, a co-worker of Adrian's, happened to be vacationing at the same resort with her husband. Julia called him and said, "Adrian, I feel awkward telling you this, but I'm at the same resort as Elena, and she's not alone. She's with some man. I even took a picture of them sitting in the restaurant. They look like a married couple. And, by the way, they're staying in the same room." Adrian thanked Julia for the information and asked how her vacation was going. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm here with my actual husband. Just don't do anything rash, okay?" "What kind of rash decisions could I possibly make?" Adrian asked dryly. "Your children have grown up and left the nest. Your daughter just had a baby, and your son has a partner. I always thought you two had a solid family." "So did I," Adrian replied quietly. That same day, Adrian spoke with his children but didn't mention what was happening between him and Elena. Later that evening, Elena called him. "Adrian," she said cheerfully, "I've settled in at the resort. The room is wonderful, the food is great, and the treatment program is amazing. I saw a doctor today, and they've given me a full schedule of procedures, so my entire day will be busy. I'll try to come back to you sooner. I miss you already." Adrian chuckled bitterly. "You've only just left, and you already miss me? It's like that old song. Even though we're apart, it'll only make our reunion sweeter." "Oh, what song is that?" Elena asked. "It's by Konstantin Simonov," Adrian replied. His poem was turned into a song. But that's not important. Elena stayed at the resort for 15 days and returned home. From her very first day back, she began staying late at work. "We're working on a new project," she explained. "We need to finish it on time, or even earlier if we can." Adrian pretended to believe her, though he already knew that her new project was a man named Leon, the same man who had accompanied her to the resort. Leon worked in the office next door to Elena's, employed by a different company on the same floor. Adrian learned that Leon was married with 2 children. He also noticed that Elena always returned home by 8 p.m., likely because Leon had his own family obligations and couldn't stay out too late. On the first day after returning from the resort, Elena picked a fight with Adrian over nothing. He didn't mind, it gave him an excuse to move into the spare room. The next day, Adrian's children called, berating him for his supposed mistreatment of their mother. Soon, Fridays became Elena's regular, late nights, and she began coming home even later, around 11 p.m. on Saturdays. She would sleep in and then go out in the evening to visit her friend. Communication between Adrian and Elena became minimal, limited to only the most necessary conversations. Meanwhile, Elena and Leon's relationship flourished, and keeping it a secret became impossible. Their affair was common knowledge in both of their offices. By this time, Adrian had already visited a lawyer and prepared divorce papers. He expected that within a week, Elena would receive a copy along with a court summons. In the meantime, Adrian started frequenting the pub as a way to escape the tension at home. One day, he met a man named Andrew there. Andrew wasn't much of a drinker but was an avid football fan. They got to talking, and Adrian shared what was going on in his life. Andrew said, "I know a woman who's renting out a 3-bedroom flat. She can't afford to live there alone, so she's looking for a tenant. The only rule is no drinking and no bringing women over. I'll talk to her and let you know tomorrow. The next day, Andrew introduced Adrian to the woman, whose name was Anastasia. They talked, and within 2 days, Adrian had moved out of his home and into Anastasia's flat. Elena didn't even notice he was gone. It wasn't until a week later that she realized Adrian's belongings were missing. By then, Adrian had already explained everything to his children. His daughter, Lily, was furious. "Dad, she's awful. I never want to see her again. She'll never see her grandson either," she said bitterly. "Lily, you shouldn't speak about your mother like that. You mustn't stoop to her level." "Dad, are you serious? You still think there's a chance to fix things? You can't forgive her. You can't allow her to preserve your marriage after such betrayal." His son, Evan, reacted more calmly. After listening to his father, he said, "Dad, I don't want to take sides, but I don't want to see her either. Not for now, at least. Maybe over time my feelings will change, but I can't say for sure. After all, she's the one who gave birth to Lily and me, raised us, and helped shape us into who we are. It's just a shame that she didn't stick to the values she once taught us. If you need a place to stay, you can come live with us. It'll be a bit cramped, but we'll manage." "Thank you, son, but I'll be fine where I am now," Adrian replied. "How are things with you?" "Everything's fine. I feel ashamed of Mum in front of my wife's family and our friends. But we'll get through it." Meanwhile, Elena sat at her desk at work, thinking about what she should do next. It had all started as a harmless fling, something that wasn't meant to lead anywhere. She hadn't expected much from it, but then Leon suggested they go on a trip together. She understood perfectly well what it meant and unexpectedly agreed. They had a great time together, and during those 2 weeks, she completely forgot about her husband. When she came home, she realized how foolish and despicable her actions were. But instead of trying to end the affair, she started picking fights with Adrian and distancing herself from him. Adrian moved into the spare room and barely came out. As for Leon, there were no prospects for a long-term relationship. Their meetings became fleeting, quick visits to cafes and nothing serious beyond that. Leon had hinted at meeting at a motel on Saturday, but by then, the atmosphere at home had become unbearable. Elena wasn't stupid. She understood that rumors from the office had likely reached Adrian. She knew she had to save her family because her affair with Leon was a dead end. She decided that Saturday would be the last time she saw him. On Friday evening, Elena planned to knock on Adrian's door to see if he was home. She wanted to explain that she was ready to end her fling and fix their relationship. When she arrived at work that day, a secretary entered her office with a postal worker. "Do you have identification with you?" the postal worker asked. "Yes, here's my passport," Elena replied. She signed for a large envelope. Reading the sender's address, her heart sank. Adrian had filed for divorce. Her hands trembled as she opened the letter. The official language of the documents confirmed her worst fears. Divorce proceedings had begun. Her workday wasn't over, but she couldn't focus on anything. She sat at her desk in shock, unsure what to do. Suddenly, a tall woman in a pantsuit stormed into the office. It was Leon's wife. Without saying a word, she strode up to Elena and began hitting her, shouting, "You filthy bitch! You think you can take my husband? Are you going to feed my children too?" The office descended into chaos. Someone called the police, and shortly after, an ambulance arrived to take Elena to the hospital. Leon's wife was arrested for the assault. At the hospital, Elena was treated for her injuries, but she refused to stay overnight. Returning home, she looked in the mirror and was horrified by the bruises and swelling on her face. She washed up, tried to compose herself, and decided she needed to speak to Adrian immediately. She went to his room and knocked on the door. It was unlocked, so she stepped inside. The room was empty. Adrian's belongings were gone. She felt panic rising in her chest. She hadn't even noticed he was gone for an entire week. Now she realized he had left her completely. Later that evening, the doorbell rang. Elena rushed to answer it, hoping it was Adrian. Instead, a police officer stood on the doorstep. "Good evening," he said, introducing himself. "I'm here regarding the incident involving Leon and his wife. May I come in?" "Yes, of course," Elena replied nervously. "I just need to follow up on what happened earlier today. We've been informed that Leon was assaulted by his wife and fled the scene. He was found unconscious in the basement of your office building. He's been taken to the hospital." Elena thought back to the hospital earlier that day. She remembered seeing a bloodied man being rushed into surgery. She realized it must have been Leon. What about his wife? Elena asked. She was arrested and taken into custody. Her sister later arrived at the station, threatening to take matters into her own hands with anyone who wronged her sibling. The officer asked, "Do you plan to file any charges against her for the assault?" "No, I don't," Elena replied quietly. "I brought this on myself." "And what do you mean by that?" "I had an affair with Leon. His wife found out, and that's why she attacked me. I ruined everything," Elena admitted. "Well, that explains a lot," the officer said. "Do you know where your husband is? Are you trying to reconcile with him?" "I have no idea where Adrian is. I haven't seen him in a week," Elena said sadly. "And yes, I want to fix things, but I don't know if it's possible." After the officer left, Elena called her daughter, Lily. "Lily, please help me. I need to talk to your father. I want to make things right with him, but he's not answering my calls." Lily's voice was cold. "Mom, I know what you did to Dad. I don't want to hear your excuses. My husband said you're not welcome in our house, and I agree with him. Lily, it was just a meaningless fling. Can't you understand that?" Elena pleaded. "No, Mom, your meaningless fling has torn our family apart. Don't bother calling Evan either. He's blocked you." Meanwhile, Adrian was settling into his new life. Anastasia, his new landlady, appreciated having him as a tenant. He was quiet, paid on time, and caused no trouble. One evening, Adrian surprised Anastasia by setting up a small dinner table in the kitchen. When she came home, he greeted her, saying, "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I know today is your birthday." "I couldn't let it go unnoticed." Anastasia's eyes filled with tears. In the chaos of her days, she had forgotten her own birthday. They had a quiet dinner together, and later that evening, Anastasia's brother picked them up and took them to the theater for a play premiere. After the performance, they shared a glass of champagne at the theater cafe before returning home. News of Adrian's theater outing quickly reached Elena. Someone from the theater recognized him and informed her about the woman he was with. Elena was furious and called Lily, demanding her help in bringing Adrian back. "Mom, he's moved on. You should do the same," Lily said flatly. Adrian and Anastasia's friendship blossomed into something more. One evening, over dinner, Adrian proposed to her. She said yes, and a month later, they were married. The wedding was small, attended by Adrian's children, Lily and Evan. Elena spent that day alone at home with her friend Natalie, drinking wine and crying over what she had lost.